Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are turning our analytical lens toward a piece of literature that has, it's sparked some incredibly intense discussion regarding the nature of love, obsession, and the very blurry lines between the two. We are discussing the novel Us by Chao Planoy.
And it's a text that, on the surface, presents itself as a romance. But when you really put it under the microscope, it reveals something far more unsettling. We're looking at the story of Rook and Pam, a narrative that spans years, heartbreaks, and even marriages.
So the central question we're really wrestling with today is one of interpretation. Is Us a poignant, complex portrayal of forbidden love, a kind of fated connection that survives societal repression and time itself? Or, as I suspect you might argue, is it just a documentation of a deeply toxic, obsessive spiral between two individuals who, frankly, destroy everyone around them?
I wouldn't just say destruction. I'd say it's a catalog of abuse disguised as devotion. My position is that Us serves as a case study in pathology. We are dealing with stalking, physical violence, and the heartless manipulation of innocent bystanders. This isn't a love story. It's a warning label.
And I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective. I'm going to argue that the behavior we see, while yes, it's certainly messy and at times extreme, is a reaction to a repressive environment. That this is a tragedy about quote-unquote soulmates who are forced into impossible situations, and it frames their intensity not as toxicity, but as a protective, transcendent passion that logic just can't dictate.
Then let's get into the evidence, because I think the text paints a very specific and very red picture.
Okay, so I want to start with the very foundation of their relationship, because this is really where the whole, soulmate argument takes root. We have to look at the Cyrano de Bergerac element of the plot. Rook, our protagonist, falls for Pam while she's dating Rook's brother, Cowie. But the critical piece here is the letters. Rook writes love letters on behalf of her brother and...
A deception, right from the start.
Well, is it, or is it a revelation of truth? The text explicitly states that Pam fell in love with the sensitivity in those letters. She admits later, "I dated Cowie because of the letter you sent." This proves that the connection between Rook and Pam was intellectual and spiritual before it was ever physical. Rook understood Pam's soul. She knew Pam liked boys with goals, loved books, was allergic to shrimp. She knew the details that her own brother, Cowie, simply didn't care about.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that framing. You call it spiritual, I call it catfishing. Ruick essentially baited Pam into a relationship with her own brother using a persona that didn't exist. And let's look at the motivation. Ruick admits in her internal monologue that she felt like an ugly duckling compared to her brother. She says, "I didn't feel intelligent, it was frustrating." This deception, it wasn't born of love. It was born of deep-seated insecurity. She used her brother as a puppet because she didn't believe she was worthy on her own.
I think you're being a little uncharitable to the complexity of a teenager grappling with feelings they don't even understand. Rook explicitly says she supported them being together initially. She wanted Pam to be happy. The tragedy is that Cowie couldn't live up to the mind that Pam fell in love with. Pam realized the disconnect. She says Cowie isn't sensitive, unlike that person in the letter. The text shows us that true love recognizes its counterpart, even through disguise.
But at what cost? Cowie is the first casualty here. He is completely set up to fail. And let's talk about how this love manifests when they're apart. We need to discuss the bear suit.
I had a feeling you would bring up the mascot.
How can I not? It is the literal definition of stalking. After they have a falling out, Rook takes a job as a mascot in a bear suit just to stand near Pam at university. She admits, "I knew I wanted to see her all the time." She tracks her movements. She follows her.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You see stalking. I see a desperate need for proximity in a world that forbids their connection. Rook says, "My 24 hours weren't the same as other people's." That is a line of poetic, unwavering dedication. She was willing to be invisible, sweltering inside a suit, just to catch a glimpse of the person she loved. It's the behavior of someone who was lovesick, not malicious.
Malice isn't a requirement for harassment, though. Impact matters. Pam explicitly confronts the person in the bear suit, not knowing it's Rook yet, and says, "Can you stop doing this? It's uncomfortable." She says it feels like a dagger cut deep. Rook is prioritizing her own kind of voyeuristic need to see that cute dimple over Pam's actual sense of safety. That is not protective passion. That is obsessive surveillance.
But notice what happens when the mask comes off, metaphorically speaking. Despite the discomfort, Pam is drawn to Rook. The friction exists because they are terrified of the intensity of their bond. And this leads into the collateral damage you mentioned in your opening. We cannot discuss this story without talking about Fami and Key.
The victims, let's call them what they are.
I acknowledge the pain caused to Fame, who was Rook's boyfriend, and Key, Pam's husband. It's undeniable, but I view this as a tragedy of circumstance, not malice. Society and Pam's own internalized homophobia, she literally says, "I will never like women," forced them into these normal heterosexual relationships. They tried to live the lie. They tried to do what was expected of them.
Trying to live a lie is a very gentle way of describing emotional abuse. Rook treats Fame, in her own words, like a trash can.
But she is self-aware enough to admit that, though.
Admission doesn't absolve the cruelty. She uses him to regulate her emotions. There is a scene where she initiates sex with Fame solely because she's frustrated about Pam. She says, "I treated him like my trash can. I was horny with one but dumped it on the other." She is using a human being as a receptacle for her displaced lust and anger. That is narcissistic.
I think it's a manifestation of her internal chaos. She's being torn apart. She asks, is there no safe place in this world for me? She isn't hurting Femi because she enjoys it. She's hurting him because she is drowning. And regarding Pam and Key, Pam marries Key to escape her feelings for Rook. It's a desperate flight response.
It's a destruction of a life. Key marries her, thinking she loves him. And how does she treat him? She admits she treated him like a pet and like a piece of tissue to wipe my tears. She refuses to show him affection, refuses to sleep with him, and eventually drives him to divorce her after 3 months. These women view other people as props in their drama. They lack fundamental empathy for anyone outside of their specific dynamic. That is the definition of a toxic dyad.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it ignores the suffocating pressure they were under. Pam was trying to kill the part of herself that loved Rook. When she sees the guest book at her wedding, the guest book where Rook signed waiting, it shatters her artifice. That one word, waiting, proves that the bond was more powerful than the institution of marriage, more powerful than the social contract. It's tragic for Key, yes, but it highlights the inevitability of Rook and Pam.
Waiting is one way to put it, hovering like a specter is another. But let's move to the internal dynamics of their relationship when they are actually together. Because if they treated the men in their lives this poorly, surely they treat each other with respect and kindness.
They treat each other with an intense passion.
They treat each other with violence and control. We have to talk about the hot coffee incident.
That was a moment of high emotion.
It was physical assault. Nanny, a girl who simply expressed interest in Rook, gets hot coffee thrown on her by Pam. Pam looks at her with a cold-cutting look and feels zero guilt. She tells Rook, "I don't have to waste my time explaining what happened. This isn't protective. This is dangerous."
I see why you emphasize the violence, but you have to look at the context of Pam's character. She is a woman who has repressed her emotions her entire life. When the dam breaks, it breaks hard. She is terrified of losing the one person who understands her. She asks Rook, "Do you like that girl?" She is acting out of a primal fear of abandonment. And later they do reconcile. Rook even finds a way to navigate Pam's jealousy.
Navigate it? She lives in fear of it. Rook explicitly says, "I can't wear a swimsuit, can't talk to other people. I am so afraid to do something wrong around you." She literally screams at Pam, "I wanted a girlfriend, not a mom." That is the text telling us this is a suffocating, controlling dynamic. I mean, if a male character told his girlfriend she couldn't wear a swimsuit or speak to others, we would immediately identify it as abusive control. Why is it passion here?
Because it's mutual. That is the nuance you are missing. Rook complains, yes, but she also stays. She also feeds into it. And the special chapter, when they finally reunite and build a life together, they call it Our World. They create a space where their specific brand of intensity makes sense. Rook says, "The whole world can hate me as long as I have you." It's an isolating love, yes, but for them, it's the only love that matters. They are two broken pieces that fit together.
Our world sounds less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. I mean, a healthy relationship integrates with society. These two have to isolate themselves because their relationship cannot function in the real world without hurting people.
Let's look at the reunion itself, though. 5 years pass, 5 years of silence, and yet the moment they see each other, the connection is instantaneous. Rook waited, Pam divorced, they found their way back. That speaks to the fate of the nature of the story I mentioned earlier. The suffering was the crucible that burned away all the impurities, the false relationships, the societal expectations, and it left only us.
Or they simply wore each other down. The happy ending involves them cutting off the outside world. Pam stops working. Rook focuses entirely on Pam. They buy handcuffs and nurse costumes, which, fine, whatever happens in the bedroom is their business, but the emotional context is still possessiveness. Pam says, the man named Kaweli must be important to you. Still jealous of the brother years later. The jealousy didn't go away, they just built a wall so high that no one else could trigger it.
But isn't that what they wanted? To be enough for each other? You call it a bunker, I call it a sanctuary. The text ends with them acknowledging that this is our world, U.S. It's a declaration of independence from a judgmental society.
It's a declaration of codependency. I want to highlight one final red flag before we conclude. The way they handle conflict. When Rook is upset that Pam hid her attendance at Feem's monkhood ceremony, Pam gaslights her initially. She says, you wouldn't understand anything. She lies to avoid Rook's jealousy. They are constantly walking on eggshells around each other's triggers. That is not a sustainable peace. It's a ceasefire.
And yet, they communicate. Rook eventually says, it was my fault that my jealousy made you lie. They take accountability. That shows growth. It shows they are learning how to love each other, even if the learning curve is steep. They are flawed humans, not role models.
I think we can agree they are certainly flawed.
So, as we reach the end of this analysis, we have two very different portraits of us. On my side, I see a story of endurance, a story where love is a force of nature, sometimes destructive, yes, but ultimately undeniable. The waiting in the guest book, the letters that bridge the gap between souls, the reunion after years of pain. It is a testament to the idea that some people are simply meant to be, regardless of the cost.
And on my side, I see a cautionary tale. I see two people who view jealousy as a love language and isolation as intimacy. The cost you mention includes the emotional devastation of Kawi, Feem, and Ki. It includes physical assault and stalking. The happy ending is merely two dysregulated people finding the only other person on Earth willing to tolerate their toxicity.
It is a blurry line indeed. Is the intensity of their feeling a justification for their actions or an indictment of them? The novel forces us to ask if true love is always healthy or if it can be something darker, something that consumes.
And I would urge our listeners to consider, if you find yourself in a relationship where you are afraid to wear a swimsuit, or where you feel the need to hide in a bear suit to watch your partner, please run.
A fair warning, though I imagine some romantics might still choose the bear suit. Thank you for joining us on the debate. We hope this discussion has illuminated the complex and perhaps dangerous world of us.
Until next time, draw your own conclusions.